Hello and welcome. This is a short PowerPoint and it covers the role of a teaching assistant specifically working and supporting hearing impaired children. It covers both primary and secondary education settings. The three main roles when supporting a child with a hearing impairment can cover communication development. This includes supporting the development of new vocabulary, speech and language programs, and allowing them to access different forms of communications, methods, and translating when needed. Every hearing impaired child has different hearing losses. Their communication development is very individualised to them. Some may use British Sign Language, some may use sign supported English, some may not use any form of sign language at all, but need the extra support with visual aids for securing new vocabulary. New vocabulary is not just subject-specific language, it is everyday language. Never assume that a hearing impaired child may know a simple basic word, because they may not. This is due to them missing out on what we call as incidental learning language. The second, access to learning. Accessing the curriculum, adapting and differentiating tasks to suit the individual child. Every child is different and they will need different differentiation, different adaptations in order for them to be able to access a lesson. Using support strategies, for example, shape coding or colour semantics. Pre and post teaching is paramount in securing the language development and also to reduce barriers. If a student is finding a lesson extremely difficult, they may need it differentiating on the spot to allowing the student to continue with the flow of the lesson. For an example, if a word is not known, then a visual aid can be used to back up this vocabulary, which can then mean that they can access the rest of the lesson. A quick way of doing this is by using a Chromebook or an iPad and searching it in Google Images and displaying the child with an image. This can make a great difference to the access for the child. And thirdly, accessing the social side of education. We're here to also support peer friendships within the classroom and outside of the classroom to build confidence to attend clubs, for example, after school clubs, school trips and social activities. It is important as a teaching assistant you are aware of the child's social needs and targets and to help them access this along with their peers. For an example, if they're outside at playtime and their peers are playing a game, but the hearing impaired child hasn't quite understood the rules of the game, which is then causing some conflicts, which is making them feel isolated and they're not able to join in. It is the role of the teaching assistant to then intervene to be able to explain to the HI child what game they are playing so that you can then step away and the child can then play the game with their peers. This is all encouraging and supporting the social aspect, which is very important. Working with a child with a hearing impairment may include checking and supporting the use of hearing technology. This is very important to make sure that their technology is working correctly. For example, radio aids, soundfield systems. This also includes the child's individual aids as well. It could be a cochlear implant, a hearing aid, and it's very important to have a good understanding of the technology that that child is using. Supporting class. Making sure you've got a good understanding of the support that the child needs. Do they need signing for translating? Do they need the TA to be note-taking for them? A lot of the time hearing impaired children are concentrating on listening, so find it difficult to take notes. So this may be the role of the teaching assistant to take notes of the key facts, and then at the end of the session going over with the child the notes that have been taken and checking and clarifying understanding. Providing visual aids to back up vocabulary and to back up, for instance, if you were doing a story, having visual aids there to prompt the child on what's coming next, what has happened, can be really useful. Making sure the child picks up on incidental learning that they have missed. Hearing children pick up on language that's being used around them through overhearing. Incidentally, they overhear others using language in the correct context, and you learn this. Often, hearing impaired children miss out on this incidental learning of language. They're not hearing language being used by others surrounding them. They don't hear it being used in an everyday context. And they miss out on a lot of learning, which can cause language delays. So it is important that as a TA, you are helping the child to access the language that is around them. For instance, if a child tells a joke and the whole class starts laughing, it's very important that the teaching assistant doesn't just dismiss this, as the child can feel very isolated as they're not aware of what's going on. It's important as a teaching assistant to translate this, to explain to the child what has just happened. Say, a child has just told a joke and that's why everybody's laughing. Tell them the joke that the child said. Make them aware that the teacher has addressed the child and told them off for making the joke and for making the others laugh. Children learn from others around them, and hearing impaired children often miss out on this. So it's very important as a role of a teaching assistant to make sure that all of this is accessible to the hearing impaired child. Be an advocate for the child or explaining their needs to others. As a teaching assistant, we want to encourage our children to be independent. We want them to be independent learners. We want them to grow and develop with the confidence to be able to approach others. So it's very important as a teaching assistant to help the child express what they need, what support strategies they find useful and what they like. For instance, if a child uses a radio aid and the teacher has the radio aid on and they're moving to another classroom, it's important to get the child to go up to the teacher and ask for their radio aid so that they can take it to the next class. As a teaching assistant, it's very easy to step in and do this for the child. This isn't encouraging their independence. However, as a teaching assistant, it may be your job to say to the child, have you forgotten your radio aid? Do you need to go and ask the teacher for it? So it's being able to prompt them and encourage them to do this. In some cases with younger children or children with additional needs, they might need a lot more support in this and being their advocate. So if they can't explain their needs, then being able to step in and do this for them. For instance, if they're put at the back of the class and they can't hear, they can't see the teacher, it might be your job to turn around and say, excuse me, I need to move the child. They're really not in a suitable position there. Carry out specific interventions, including pre and post tutoring and teaching. This is very important. If you know you've got a lesson coming up and the child is going to struggle with it, take them out for 5 minutes beforehand to give them as much preparation as possible. This can reduce barriers and give the child more opportunity to be able to access what's coming up. Working within a team to achieve targets. For example, working with a speech and language therapist, the teacher of the deaf, having good communication with the class teacher, or for instance, if you're in secondary, having that communication with all the subject teachers and leads and Senkos. It's very important to remember that we're working as a team to support this child. To help the TA provide full support for the child within the classroom, it's very useful to be aware of the information on the child's hearing loss, communication and equipment used. Every hearing impaired child is different and will use different equipment, have different communication methods and a different level of hearing loss. It is very important to be aware of these and their needs so that the TA can fully support in the areas most specific to the individual. Access to resources and specialist information. It is important as a teaching assistant to have access to all resources that may be needed and specialist information. This may include information from teachers of the deaf, speech and language therapists, and resources, for instance, shape coding, colour semantics, vocabulary packs, visual aids to secure vocabulary which is going to be used within the lesson. Targets from the EHCP plan. It's very important when working with a child to be aware of their individual targets from their EHC plan. This is what the child is working towards. Sometimes it may mean that within the lesson, if they don't achieve the learning objective, they can work towards a target on their EHCP plan. Information from intervention groups to be transferred into the classroom. If a child has been taking part in intervention groups, it is important to be aware of what they have been achieving within these groups, so this can be transferred into the classroom. For instance, if they've been in an intervention group and they have been using shape coding to support the sentence structure, it is ideal to be aware of this so that then in the literacy lesson, the shape coding can be carried over into the classroom. Resources relevant to the activity. It's very important as a teaching assistant to have resources ready and available for the next activity. This may mean preparing visual aids and resources prior to. So if you're describing the feel of something, to have different types of material there for the child to actually feel. Is it bumpy? Is it smooth? This just supports the vocabulary and it means that it's something physical that the child can relate to. Regular updates are very important. It's very important to keep in communication with the class teacher, the teacher of the deaf, and anybody else that's working around that child. If possible, it's best to have the planning for the lessons in advance, so therefore any resources that may be needed can be produced before the lesson starts. The targets include both social and personal targets. It's very important to make sure that the feedback is given to the SENCO, the teacher of the deaf, and to the class teacher on what the child has achieved, what they may be struggling with, and how they found the lesson. This can then be used as evidence as well. Looking at the two pictures in this slide, where would you position the hearing impaired child, the teacher, and also the teaching assistant? I'm just going to give you a moment to look at the pictures and to think about it. So in the first picture, you can see that the teacher is standing up at the board. You've got tables positioned slightly behind the teacher and table positioned in front. The ideal place for the hearing impaired student would be at the front of that table. The second picture, you can see where the teacher's desk is. So the teacher will be stood there. Ideally, the hearing impaired children would need to be on the centre table at the front of the room. This gives them clear access to the teacher. So where would the teaching assistant be positioned? They don't need to be sat directly next to the child. You don't want the teaching assistant positioned at the opposite side of the classroom from the teacher, because therefore, especially if the child is relying on signing, they can't access the teacher's face and the signing at the same time. Ideally, you want the teaching assistant to be positioned near the class teacher and the child at the front of the room. This allows the child to have access to the teacher's face, so if they're lip reading. It also gives them easy access to be able to see the sign in if they need that sign in for clarification. And also it gives them easy reach for them to be able to hear as well and to see clearly. Practical tips for working with a hearing impaired child. The positioning of the child is very important. Try and position them towards the front of the classroom so that they can see the speaker's face clearly. Try to avoid standing in front of windows or moving around the classroom when talking. This makes it extremely hard for the child to follow. Using technology provided, for example, soundfield systems and radio aids. If a teacher is using a microphone and asks a question and a child answers, try to encourage the child to answer into the microphone, so use it to pass it around. Try not to talk when you have your back towards the child, and also do not talk to the child whilst the teacher is talking. Using visual aids to support new vocabulary when possible. Clarify at the end what the child has heard and their understanding before they're set off to complete the task. Always get their attention before you start to speak to them, and speak clearly and naturally. Do not raise your voice or speak slowly, as this changes the lip pattern, which can make it more difficult for them to understand. Be aware of background noises, for example, heaters, fans, taps, and other children talking. If a child is sat next to a heater and the heater is on, that is going to be very hard for them to be able to hear. So this is very important to take into consideration. Communicate with them as much as possible. You can never communicate with a hearing impaired child too much. The more communication, the better. This builds on vocabulary. It gives them the confidence with communicating with others. To be aware of the child's communication needs. Only about 20% of hearing impaired children use sign language as their main form of communication. So it's very important to have an understanding of what the child wants. Do they want signing? Do they want to listen, but then to have the signs to back up what they've heard as clarification? And also, are they using British Sign Language? Are they using sign-supported English? There's many forms of communication. You could also use PECs to back up what the teacher's saying or the daily routines. So it's very important to have a good understanding of what form of communication the child wants to help best support their needs. Pre and post teaching can be an important role of a teaching assistant. Pre-teaching. Pre-teaching is very important. It can reduce barriers and help the child to access the lesson that is coming up. Pre-teaching is the teaching of language learners need before an activity. For instance, if a child is going into a topic lesson and has never had access to the vocabulary before, this automatically becomes a barrier and they're not going to achieve as much from the lesson. If pre-teaching has taken place prior to this, and the vocabulary has been taught to the child so that they have an understanding of that before, they find it a lot easier and can gain a lot more knowledge from that lesson. It means that resources can be made, they can be used within the lesson, so they can be used for the pre-teaching and they can be transferred into the lesson as well. Often or not, it's not just the hearing impaired child that we need the pre-teaching. You may have EAL children within the classroom. You may have children with special educational needs as well, which will also benefit from the pre-teaching. So this can be done in small groups. There are many ways that pre-teaching can be carried out. Some of the activities that can be used to support pre-teaching vocabulary are using word pots, making word dice, making word maps. It's introducing that vocabulary, looking at the understanding of it, and then transferring it into the lesson. This is the same with if you are going to be doing a writing piece of work within a literacy lesson about a specific book. It's useful for the child to look at the book beforehand, before the lesson, so that they have a good understanding of the story before being expected to access and to complete the writing. Post-teaching. A lot of people tend to forget about post-teaching. Post-teaching is just as important as pre-teaching. It secures the child's understanding of the lesson and helps the child to retain that use of language. It also helps to offer any support. So if a child has really struggled during the lesson, continuing with post-teaching can help the child develop this further. So this gives them extra time and extra support to make sure that they have fully understood the lesson and therefore can continue to develop on this. Post-teaching also helps with memory retention. If a child hears the vocabulary once, they may not necessarily remember it and have a full understanding and be able to use it in the future in the correct context. Post-teaching often helps children to retain this information. It's a follow-up of this language, especially if it's a word, for example, evaporation. They hear it in the pre-teaching, they understand the meaning of it, they go into the science lesson, they use it in the correct context, the science lesson finishes, they may not then use that word for another 12 months. When they come around to it, they're not going to have retained that information. Post-teaching can help secure this language and to help the retaining of this. One of the activities I love to do is I have a little word pot. So when we have our pre-teaching, we put the word in our pot. During the lesson, we get our pot out, we use those words, and it then goes back in the cupboard. For post-teaching activities, we'll often go and get the word pot back out, and we will just go over that vocabulary in the language. This helps a child refresh this language and helps them to retain it. So you may access 1 week, it may go in the cupboard for 2 weeks, and then you pull it back out again. It doesn't have to be a long session. They can be quick sessions that can be done during a spare moment within the day.
My name is Shelley Brown. I'm a specialist HLTA for hearing impairment at St John Fisher Catholic High School. I work alongside Miss Catherine Wilson, who is not only the hub manager, but she is the Senko assistant head for the school. I've been working as a teaching assistant for the hearing impaired for about 11 years, and I have seen over time how support has changed. In the past, you used to be Velcro to the deaf student, and it wasn't advised to work with other students. Now it is advisable that you are not glued to that student and that you work with all other students. This helps the deaf child not to feel any different from others. It allows them to promote their own independence, work individually, see their own progression, and it also helps with social and emotional welfare. In the past, I have overcome problems working with teachers who have overruled what I've requested, such as please put that deaf child in the front of the classroom, and they have come back and refused. They have asked children to take notes when I know that they can't. But over time, you have the confidence to be able to go to your Senko teacher of the deaf and say you're not happy how the deaf student is being supported. It is your role to make sure that if you feel the student isn't being supported appropriately, please speak to somebody, because this will actually hinder the progression of the deaf student. As a hub, we are here to help with resources. We have a large bank of visual aids, links that you can access. We are here to help you with guidance and support. So please feel free for both secondary and primary. Please contact us, Catherine or myself, and we will be happy to help. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hayley Dines. I've been a hearing impaired teaching assistant at Middleton Primary School for just over 14 years now. I thoroughly enjoy my role, although I have to say it can be challenging at times. It's not an easy role by any means. Middleton Primary School is the HI hub for primary settings. We offer resources to be loaned out. We offer any help or support. If you're unsure of anything, you can contact us, and we're more than happy to help or support and loan out resources. I feel one of the most important parts of being a teaching assistant is to have good communication with others that are also supporting that child. It's very much part of working as a team in order to achieve the child's targets, and working closely and keeping communication going at all times. And remembering that you're not on your own. We're all here to support and to help, and working as a team.